you heard about what I do. I am the co-founder of AfricanAncestry.com. We are the pioneers of genetic ancestry tracing for Black people. When I say pioneer, I mean pioneer. We started this business 15 years ago. So before there was an Ancestry.com on television, before there was a 23andMe.com on television, there were two Black people, a Black woman entrepreneur and a Black male geneticist, who decided that we wanted to transform the way that we as Black people view ourselves and the way we view Africa. And we chose to do that through DNA. And so I'm very proud to say that we started this business for Black folks. And we continue to be for us, by us. Samuel asked me to talk about my entrepreneurial journey. And because I'm in the identity business, I thought that it would be best if I talked to you in terms of my entrepreneurial identity. And when I reflect on that, I wanted to share 3 aspects of my entrepreneurial identity. Now, you all know that identity is a narrative of self. It's the characteristics, the qualities, the beliefs that define who you are. And so, as an entrepreneur, I think there are some key things. There are many things. I missed the first talk of the day. Authenticity is definitely a key thing for us as African ancestry, and for me as Gina Paige. But I think being someone who is prepared is the first aspect of my entrepreneurial identity that has enabled us to succeed. So and I'm going to steal that timeline kind of slide, if you don't mind. I really thought that was a good slide. My entrepreneurial career started really as a little girl, and I didn't even realize it. But everybody in my family on my father's side is in business. So it just was kind of by assimilation. And you all know King's Dominion down in Virginia, right? Is it still called King's Dominion? Six Flags, something, I don't know. Well, I'm going to show my age, but when it first opened, I was a little girl, and we wanted to go, my cousin and I, and my parents were like, well, sure, you can go. It costs $7. Where are you all going to get the $7? So we started a magazine. And we sold, of course, they did all the work, right? They provided the labor, the capital, but they printed it off and sold it to their friends and our family members. And that was my first taste at creating a product and generating a profit, so to speak. But I designed all of my education and my professional career around the idea that I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I didn't want to work for anybody. That was my one goal. I wanted to work for myself. So I went to the best college I could. I attended Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. I went to the best business school I could for free, the University of Michigan Ross School of Business in Ann Arbor. And then I went to Fortune 500 companies. I worked at Colgate-Palmolive Company, where I sold Palmolive dish liquid and Baby Magic bath products. I went to Sara Lee Bakery, where I was the pie queen. So I was responsible for the entire frozen pie category at Sara Lee. And so it was my approach that I was going to learn as much as I could about business on someone else's dime. I didn't just jump in and say, I want to do work for myself and then just make something up. I learned on their dime with the world's most well-recognized brands to learn how it's done. Okay, so then I was like, I've had enough of this. I really don't want to work for anybody else. Over that time, I had built a network. We talk a lot about networking here. I built a network and maintained that network through college, through business school, through professional acquaintances, and I was financially prepared. So I had enough money so that I could take the risk in case my business life didn't go the way I expected it. I wasn't going to be down and out. That leads me to the next facet of my entrepreneurial identity, which is being courageous. So all of my friends had MBAs, right? That's just what happens. You kind of move with the people that you have the most in common with. And they were buying houses, they were starting families. I was living in apartments, didn't have any kids. And so when I got ready to jump, they were all like, oh my God, how are you gonna do that? I have too many bills, I have too many responsibilities. And I had prepared to not have that level of fear. And so I started off on my own because one of my frustrations with corporate America was that I was working on brands that didn't want to talk to black folks. And when you're in marketing, part of what's fun is either working on a brand you enjoy, you like, you feel good about, or talking to people you like, you feel good about. And I wanted to talk to black people. But I just kept hitting brick wall after brick wall, and so I just decided to do it on my own. So I started a consulting company where I did marketing and project management for companies that were talking to black people. And then I met Dr. Kittles. And Dr. Rick Kittles was a geneticist here at Howard. He was on the team from Howard that went to New York to do research on the African Burial Ground Project. If you are familiar with that project, they were building a federal building in Lower Manhattan. They came upon a cemetery. They had to stop construction. And Dr. Kittle's job was to determine where those bones were from. And people started to say to him, well, if you can do this for bones, you should be able to do it for me. I'm still alive. They watched CSI and all that and thought that they knew. And so he thought, he had always been doing this work, this research, trying to connect African Americans, Africans in the diaspora, and Africa, but for himself, for his own sense of identity. He wanted to know where he was from. It wasn't enough to know that he was West African. It wasn't enough to claim Gambia because he saw Roots and Kunta Kinte. It wasn't enough to claim Senegal because he saw Mandingo movie. He used his talents for himself. But when the community started to say, we want to know, tell us, he thought, okay, I must be onto something. Well, time passed. I had been out on my own, and he and I were introduced by a colleague at Howard University. And I listened to his idea. I heard what he was saying, and it took me back to my economics degree. There was a demand by people to want to know where they're from, and he had the supply to answer the question. But he was a genetics researcher. He wasn't a business person. And so we collaborated, and I commercialized his research. That took a lot of courage, because in 2003, like I said, there were only 2 other companies in the business, and nobody was checking for Africa. No one. And in fact, why would they? Why would they want us to have the power that comes from knowing where we're from and being connected across the Atlantic? That's just not something that people want. We're the original victims of identity theft. As Daniel said, they took our identities for a reason. Why would they want us to get them back? And so we embarked on this company. We started with $1,200 and the largest database of indigenous African lineages in the world. And that's how AfricanAncestry.com was started. Now, that leads me to the next facet of my entrepreneurial identity, which is perseverance. As you can imagine, we had critics coming out the woodwork. We got a lot of national coverage, media coverage, because we were the 21st century roots. We can't use, when I say we, I mean African Americans, we can't use church records and marriage records and birth records and census records, because we weren't even recorded as people until the 1870 census. So if we want to know where we come from before Alabama, before Maryland, before Haiti, before Jamaica, before Brazil, we're at a loss. And DNA answers that question. But again, people didn't want us to be able to do that for our community. And it wasn't just people outside of the community. There's a huge learning curve for people inside the community that I actually hadn't thought about, because you didn't hear me say anything about market research. I didn't do any market research. We didn't write a business plan. We didn't follow any of the steps that you're supposed to follow when you're starting a business. But I thought, who wouldn't want to know? Well, there are a lot of people, as I'm sure you all know, living here in this area, who walk around saying, I'm not African. I don't know, I'm not African. So we have people who don't believe they're African. There are people who believe they're African but don't believe it's possible to know where. And then there are people who, there's just people across the whole spectrum. And so we had to deal with criticism, not just from white colleagues on a scientific end who wanted us to share our data, right? Oh, well, it hasn't been proven, it hasn't been, even though it was peer-reviewed and all of that, well, we won't know if it's really valid unless we see the data. No, no, no. That's our core competency, and you will never get that. But also people within our community. What are you going to do with my DNA? Are you going to clone me? They say it. I'm telling you, I can't make this stuff up. So, it's been 15 years, and it's been quite a journey, to say the least. And then there's the competition. So, the competitors basically would tell people that they were African. And that would be very frustrating to me, because you don't need a DNA test to tell you that you're African. And then they moved into this type of DNA testing where they'll tell you how much African ancestry you have versus how much European or Native American or Asian. And that's not the kind of test we do, because what difference does it make? That changes the narrative. That changes the narrative to that there's some value if you're this much versus this much of something else. But let me tell you, if you are 40% African ancestry or 60% or 80%, that's not going to stop you from not getting a loan, from not getting a cab, and from not getting shot in the back. So that's not the question that we believe is important to answer. The question we believe that it is important to answer is, who am I? People now are traveling, they're investing, they're learning languages, they're naming their children, they're interacting with the communities that they live in here in the States or in the Caribbean or elsewhere. They truly do stand prouder, taller, and walk with more confidence, because they can say, like I, that they share maternal ancestry with the Fulani people living in Nigeria today. Thank you.
All right, so Gina, why don't you come on back, come on, let's give our hand. Now, when you talk about a true entrepreneurial journey, right? You should have given up a long time ago.
Oh, yeah, well.
Why didn't you give up?
That's a great question. Today, my answer is the ancestors.
Wow.
Because I was ready to give up many times. And in fact, this time last year, I thought we were done.
Wow.
So it's not me.
Sure. So Wakanda is real.
Wakanda's in all of us.
There you go. Come on, let's put our hands together for Gina one more
Thank you.
time. Amazing, amazing.